Hello and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we are reviewing Poor Things. Brought back to life by an unorthodox scientist, a young woman runs off with a lawyer on a whirlwind adventure across the continents. Free from the prejudices of her times, she grows steadfast in her purpose to stand for equality and liberation. Poor Things is directed by Yorgos Lanthimos and stars Emma Stone, Willem Dafoe, Ramy Youssef, Mark Ruffalo, and many more. So Jeffrey, what did you think about Poor Things?
So I think first we have to talk about how we encountered Yorgos Lanthimos as a filmmaker. I first encountered him when he made a film called Dogtooth, which was the Greek submission for international film for the Oscars. It happened to get a surprise nomination, and I watched it that year. It is very Yorgos Lanthimos, and it is very disturbing, and it is also quite funny if you're able to liberate your mind from having any feeling whatsoever for the characters. From there, he made The Lobster, which got quite a bit of acclaim, and then from there, Killing of a Sacred Deer, and then from there, The Favorite. The Favorite was certainly his most acclaimed film. He got the most Oscar nominations for that film. He got a nomination for Best Director, Best Screenplay. It won Best Actress for Olivia Colman. I've had a fairly long relationship with this director, and I've always really liked his work because I think that he has a very singular vision, a singular sense of humor, and a singular cynicism about his work that I've always really liked. As I said before, you almost have to leave your feelings at the door with a lot of his films. They do invite you to laugh at people and laugh at societal conventions in a way that is really biting and quite piercing. Poor Things epitomizes a lot of what makes him great. It brings in some heart and also a little bit of a triumphant feeling that I've really never gotten from his films before. You leave this film almost feeling like justice is being served, which is not a thing I've ever felt in his movies before. Even The Favorite, which in my opinion, it's a great movie, it's an A movie, but I think that was him almost distilling his more scorched earth cynicism of his early foreign films into a more Americanized film that was a little easier to digest. But even that film has a pretty downer ending. This movie, I mean, not to spoil anything, but things work out in this movie. This movie is about a person who learns things, who grows, who we come to identify with, which is very new for this director.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think when you were talking briefly about Yorgos and the singular vision that he has, I want to add style to that as well, because I think he has a very particular style that really transcends all of his films. One of the few directors I know making these films of this popularity that has a fisheye lens. And the way he balances and incorporates the fisheye lens into his films and the narratives, I think is always very interesting to see. I do want to get into that a little bit more down the line when we get into more specifics about this film.
It's very daring and it's very striking, and it clearly means something, and I'm not sure what. But anyway, we'll get to that.
I do want to get into Emma Stone's character because she plays the main titular character, Bella Baxter, in this movie. Bella! And she...
Bella. It's in the trailer, not spoiling anything. Bella.
This movie basically rests on her shoulders. It does not work without Emma Stone. I thought she was absolutely transcendent in this movie. What is so great about her performance in this film is throughout the progression of the movie, her performance changes as her character is changing, which I just love absolutely so much. At the beginning of the movie, there's this very disconnected look in her eyes, but as the movie progresses, just looking at her eyes, the way that she becomes clearer in just her eyes it's absolutely masterful.
Even the way that she moves her body, she has this way when she's younger, quote unquote, where she's kind of like a child. A child hasn't totally gotten its functions correctly. It doesn't know how to use motion correctly and use its body in spaces. It doesn't understand that. So Emma Stone finds that throughout the film, and you find that towards the end she's very proper and she makes good eye contact and things like that. But earlier in the film, she has like her whole body at the dinner table is up like this, and she's like rolling. And yeah, it's a very nuanced performance. The performance has a lot of obviousness about it, but it has a lot of intention too. I don't want to divert from the actors. We should talk more about the actors, but the film is more of a flat-out comedy than I think Yorgos has ever made before. There's about 1,000 laugh lines in this movie, and almost all of them land. And a majority of them rest on Emma Stone's shoulders.
Going from there, I just want to say that I did have that in my notes, that the way she interacts with space and objects also changes throughout the course of the movie, which I found really interesting and also really cool. So do we want to keep going on actors for now, or?
Yeah, give Mark Ruffalo an Oscar? No, I mean, I know, listen, that's a very packed category. I'm not saying necessarily that he should win. And Emma Stone is probably the highlight of the film. However, Mark Ruffalo is a very close second. And I think the film really takes off when he shows up.
He was more of a surprising delight, I would say, in this movie, because I did not expect him to be as good as he ended up being, or his role in the movie.
Yeah, Yeah, and I think he perfectly encapsulates this just sad desperation that a lot of men have, where they pretend like they're so tough and they pretend like they're so controlling, but the second they lose control of the thing they love, they just go crazy. He encapsulates that beautifully. Not only is the writing in his performance so funny, but also his performance and the way that he pronounces his lines are so funny. We haven't seen a performance this good from him maybe since Spotlight. It's maybe been about 10 years.
He has this very funny possessiveness about himself in his connection to women that is really funny, but also a little bit of commentary on a very specific type of male in society.
Totally. And as the film goes on, she finds her independence, she finds her things that she is passionate about, and she has to make certain compromises. So she grows less dependent on him, and he grows more dependent on her, which only makes the relationship and the chemistry between them all the funnier.
She has this personality of almost being so honest to a fault. It contributes to so much of the hilarity of the movie.
What's the line you said to me when we walked out of the screening? You said, even when she says something wrong, it's kind of right.
Oh yeah, I did say that.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for reminding me of that. I didn't have that in my notes. So there's a dinner sequence where she's out to dinner and she's sitting at a table with 3 other people. And there are things that she says that you shouldn't be saying at this table, but she just says them. And they're so funny, but there's a truth to them. Following that, there's a dance sequence, which I found absolutely hilarious.
Oh, that's great.
But it's the breaking of societal norms and not conforming to what everybody else is doing.
That's where the film's thematic concerns really start coming in, is through this character. She's looking at this high society and all of these societal rules that we have with an outsider's lens because she's not used to them. She has a brain that's less developed than everybody else's. So the way that she looks at a situation is she just gets to the truth of it. She doesn't do all of the niceties. She doesn't understand the context of conversation. So she'll sometimes just say something that is right in her mind, but out of context just doesn't make any sense in the conversation that is going on. The film almost capitalizes on this idea that we all know the correct thing to say. So for her to do the incorrect thing is really a source of a lot of the comedy. And that points out all of these very specific, very funny ways that we tried to not hurt each other's feelings. And the film is just so happy to break all of those things, which is really the source of a lot of the hilarity.
And I would say a lot of the meaning and purpose of the movie itself. So a point I should have made earlier is one of the things I love so much about this movie is the very enchanting, whimsical vibe that it had, that played with the score, that played with very much the production design of this film, which I was absolutely obsessed with the production design of this movie. For a little bit backstory, we did see this movie at New York Film Festival this past weekend. They did a Q&A afterwards with a bunch of the crew, and one of the person there was the production designer, or there's actually two production designers. Yes. So that's what they had said in the Q&A about the production design, is that they really wanted you to get lost in their own sets. So they built them for a way that even the cast and crew, like, they could get lost in them and live in them.
I remember saying this to you after the screening, that you could tell that by the way the camera moves, because the camera moves so freely, even sometimes in circles around these sets, that it's not like a sitcom set where a wall is missing. It's something that was built from scratch, and there's so many ornate details that you really can't tell where they started. It's not as if a whole room is built around this one beautiful set piece. There are so many small details that you say, how did somebody imagine all of these things? Or did they just start with one small detail and they added this and they added that and they added that? But anyway, they're so ornate and so complex. It's some of the best production design that we've seen all year so far.
I don't know if it comes down to the production design or the filming style or a combination of both, but it had this very dreamy feel to it. The production design didn't really feel anchored in reality in many sequences. And I'm not talking about, there's like a lot of weird things that are happening, so I'm not really talking about those things, because there's like a blending of futuristic elements
and ancient elements.
Yeah, so I'm not really talking too much about that. I'm more talking about how just the buildings look.
They almost look like Dr. Zeus or something like that.
Yeah, immediately what I thought of was Epcot, and how you go through the World Showcase. If you've ever been, you can go through all the countries, and they're really well designed in the production of them. You kind of get lost in some of these places. And so that's the initial thing that I thought while watching the movie, was that it reminded me sort of like that. There is rooms in the house that have like padding all over the floor for a particular reason. The textures on the walls, there's so many different little elements.
I kept noticing the light fixtures everywhere. There's very interesting, very ornate, and very different light fixtures depending on where we are and what theme is trying to be conveyed for that section.
I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say this movie takes place in parts. So each part takes place in a sort of different location.
It's almost kind of like Gulliver's Travels or maybe Candide, which are these satirical novels from earlier where the main character just goes from place to place, and each place is meant to satirize a certain something about society, whether that be socialism or certain economic structures or certain societal concerns. Anyway, so the film very much takes that framework and does its own thing with it.
All right, so from here on out, I think we should get deeper into the movie. We've talked a lot about it to an extent, but there are so many elements and themes about the movies that I do want to get into. So I think from here, if you have not seen Poor Things, I would come back after you've seen the movie, unless you don't mind being spoiled as to certain aspects of the film.
Yeah, and we're not going to spoil events that happen in the film, but we will talk about what the movie's about. So depending on your comfort level.
Going from there, I do want to go back a little bit to the cinematography because I alluded to earlier and the discussion about the way that the fisheye lens is utilized. And I noticed very particularly that the fisheye lens was used a lot for either showing off a location. I felt like the more serious notes about the film always resulted in the changing of those dynamics, and you would get a closer lens that was blurring out the background, something with a low aperture, and really was highlighting the actor's face. So that was the impression that I got from the use of the fisheye lens. I don't think it was too deep. Maybe there is more to it that I wasn't really thinking about, but that's just what I noticed, like the pattern is the way that the fisheye lens was used versus other lenses. And
well, there's certainly an aesthetic concern too, is probably as well as a thematic one.
Oh, also weird note. The doctor, Willem Dafoe's character, he plays God Goodwin, Dr. Goodwin or something like that, but they just refer to him as God in the movie. This is so side note from the whole thing we've been talking about, but he blows like a bubble from like the stuff that's like from the operation.
Oh my God, I don't know how I forgot about that, but I did.
So I gotta say, like when this first happened, the entire audience laughed so hard.
But it was a specific laugh. It was a what the hell?
Yeah.
There's a specific laugh that you have when you know something and you're in on the joke. And this was like more of an uncomfortable kind of like just what was that? Yeah.
It was a great way to introduce us to maybe the comedy of the film and how it was going to play out.
Yeah.
But I did not find that funny at all. I found it so stupid. I'm like, why is everybody laughing? But I gotta say that joke became so hilarious. I have found it almost as like an introduction to what the joke would be.
There's a point, I don't remember the exact context, but there's a point where they cut away from something quite serious to that again later in the movie. And it's really funny. It's only funny because they had set it up 2 hours earlier.
Exactly. So that's what I'm referring to. That I came to love the bubble. I do want to make note of the weird animals that are around the house. I think those were hilarious.
Very funny.
They're like combinations of different animal parts. So like the head of a chicken attached to a dog.
And they looked really good.
They did.
For being CGI or whatever they are. Yeah, they looked very convincing.
Going back to the conversation we were having a little bit earlier with Mark Ruffalo's character, I want to bring in some of the other characters in this conversation because I think this movie has a lot to say about the different types of men that exist in society from a grander standpoint. Mark Ruffalo was one particular example of that, but then you have Ramy Youssef's character, and he is playing this guy that moves into the house to observe Bella. But the great thing about his character is that he turns into that manly figure that is not possessive at all, that's very understanding and caring, and really does have Bella's interest in mind, but also doesn't want to inhibit her from exploring what she needs to explore in life and wants to.
And he's not a static character. He changes throughout. You get the sense in the first 20 or 30 minutes that he's almost attracted to her because she's an infant, because he can control her, and that she's kind of otherworldly, but also not that intelligent. And he grows to love her more as the film progresses. Ramy is definitely the ideal masculinity for the film. There is another character that we're not even going to mention because he comes in towards the end of the film, but that character is probably the most toxic of them all. I'm assuming you're also going to talk about Jerrod Carmichael's character.
I was going to bring him up, but I think you have something to say.
I think when we were talking before about how the film tries to satirize all these different elements, I think that is them satirizing this intellectual element. So Jerrod Carmichael comes in almost as like a Friedrich Nietzsche stand-in.
He's like the cynic.
Yeah, he's the cynic. He's the one that's like, everything is meaningless, everything is this. And she's able to shatter his perspective with just a singular line that, again, I will not spoil. But it shows you how cynicism is just a protective layer for all of the things that you don't want to experience in life. And that's where the film gets quite a bit more serious. I think that Bella starts to learn things about the world that are not quite as fun. She's been in high society for a long time, eating great food, drinking great champagne, dancing all night, and then she starts to learn about the woes of the world, which brings in an emotional element that I really wasn't prepared for. I think when you go to see a Yorgos Lanthimos film and you're expecting Lobster or The Favorite, you're not really expecting too much of an emotional core. And that's the first time I think he's really found that in this film.
From there, about a conversation with men, I love the running joke in this movie about how quick men are to violence. There was so many times where a man would just say, I'm going to fight that man, I'm going to punch him.
Have you seen Airplane?
No, I don't
You
think
haven't
so.
seen Airplane?
No.
Oh, it's famous comedy. But there's a scene in Airplane where some woman is freaking out and they all just start beating her up, and then it's like, no, no, get out of the way, and then they start beating her up, and there ends up being this line of people that's just like beating this person. And I know that like
Is it played for comedy or seriousness?
it's played for comedy.
Oh.
It's a comedy. But anyway, the reason I say that is because I think that scene is almost an equal satire to this idea of like almost like a male riot. Just this idea of one person wants to fight, so suddenly 400 people want to fight. I think this film has a very similar sensibility in that way.
I will say on maybe a more critical note, this movie does have a lot of these different things going on, and maybe a weakness of it is that it gives so little attention to so many different things that you can't really grab on to something very in particular in a very much more of a deeper way.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it has one singular theme throughout it, unless it's like a vague feminism or something.
Yeah.
But there are so many things that it just touches on. It's really more of like a jack of all trades and a master of none, as that phrase would go.
But that being said, I do think it balanced all those for what it could do. I think it did it really well.
Yeah, I agree.
So you ready to go to grades?
I think I'm going to give Poor Things a B+. I think it's a lovely film. I had an absolute joy watching it. I thought it was flat out hilarious. It's maybe equal to Barbie. No, I think I laughed a little bit more in this than Barbie. Not to say anything bad about Barbie. I love Barbie.
Why are we comparing?
I'm only comparing because they're the two funniest movies of the year.
Oh, okay, I see.
Anyway, I found this film a touch funnier. I actually laughed quite a bit. Probably the most out of anything this year. I will say that I found it a little long. It's a film that's very winding, and apparently the novel is quite long, and it has many different facets and many different settings, and I guess trying to distill that down into an adaptation was a very difficult thing to do, according to what the writer said. But at the same time, there are times when the film takes you on these divergences that you're just kind of like, why are we here? Or this is just unnecessarily elongating a sequence. It doesn't happen a lot. Unfortunately, it does happen towards the end. There's a point when you think the film is going to end, and then it does a whole other thing. And the whole other thing it does, I liked quite a bit. But I think that the way that other thing was brought into the narrative wasn't particularly elegant. With those flaws in mind, I think the film is really wonderful. I would encourage anyone to see it. Even somebody who's like a mainstream moviegoer, quote unquote, to go see this movie. I think they would have a lot of fun. And the film is just weird enough that I think you can get on its level, but it has a lot of laughs and it has a lot to like about it. I would encourage anybody to go see this film.
I would say for the weirdness that it is, I did find it to be very approachable from a certain way.
Definitely, especially compared to his other film.
It almost felt like a very much more adult and weirder Tim Burton movie.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't made a good movie in like 30 years, but yeah, sure.
No, I'm thinking back to like Edward Scissorhands. Like that was one of the movies I thought of when I was seeing this movie.
I think that this movie's a lot better than those. But yes, I understand what you're getting.
I'm just talking about like thematically, if you haven't seen this movie yet, that's the vibe maybe, like the whimsical, mystical, weird type of vibe.
Yeah, except it's good.
Yeah, okay. Wow, the hate. Anyways, I give this movie an A-. I really thoroughly did enjoy it. Another thing I didn't mention was the score.
The score was great.
The way that the score progresses throughout the movie and ends on the final shot, I thought had a lot to say about the character and the narrative. I think going from there, if I had another negative to say about the movie, and I really do not mean this in a prudish way, I think there might have been a certain degree of the focus on the sexual aspects of the movie.
The film has a tendency to want to shock you, I think.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing because I thoroughly enjoyed these scenes. They were so funny and so humorous, especially between Emma Stone and Mark Ruffalo.
And they're so weird. And to watch them with 1,200 people, it just felt very odd.
That being said, I loved how the film didn't shy away from this sense of female self-sexual exploration, the inhibition and the liberation of her character sexually. I'm not saying any of that doesn't exist, but I think maybe the focus was a little bit too much on it, that I thought it took away a little bit from other elements of the film that I really, really liked. There was this underlying current about mundanity and its role in Bella's character, about how she becomes so tired of something so quickly and how she feels like she has to go out and explore and move on to the next thing. And I thought that was like an underlying thing that I feel like was being focused on earlier in the movie, and then I think was a little bit lost towards the end of the movie. I don't know if it was something that I was just hoping they were going to come back to and they just didn't, so it could just be a personal thing, but I love that the movie was kind of dealing with that concept.
Yeah, you like Bella furiously jumping.
What did I tell you?
Furious jumping, that's what she called sex.
Oh yes, the furious jumping.
Will you furious jump me?
It was good.
Something I didn't get the chance to say is that Emma Stone is a fairly big star. She's somebody that just about everybody knows who she is. So I think for her to take on this role and do the things that she does in this movie, there are a lot of stars that would read this script and be like, nah, I'm good. Like, I want to preserve my public image, blah, blah, blah. This is an utterly fearless performance for an actress of a certain renown. And I really give her a lot of credit for that, because I think when you're that famous, you really have to consider what each role is going to do to your fame. And she shows a fearlessness in this role that I think is really awesome. You know, I couldn't imagine some other very popular actresses doing these things.
All right, and that's it for our review of Poor Things. Poor Things is coming out in theaters December 8th, so go check it out. If you've seen Poor Things, let us know in the comments. What did you think of the movie? As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.